because men are, tremendously at risk. And most of the suicides are men. If you look at the incarceration rate, it's disturbing. You look at the addictions, and the need to help men, mental health issues in particular. I mean, it's stunning. And I don't feel that the church has really responded. Where are we? And there's a certain stigma because everybody's screaming, toxic masculinity. And it's a Me Too world. And I will tell you, I don't think any conversation I've had has been the same. They're all different. And every church, has a little bit of a different approach. But, kind of my angle on it is, look, we need to fix our approach. Sometimes our approach is just broken. It's just broken.
Marcus Aurelius said, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." What is your life echoing through eternity? Welcome to Echoes Through Eternity with Dr. Jeffrey Skinner. Our mission is to inspire, engage, and encourage leaders from across the globe to plant missional churches and be servant leaders. So join us and hear the stories of servant leaders reverberating lives as God echoes them through eternity. Brought to you by Missional Church Planting and Leadership Development and Dynamic Church Planting International.
Welcome in Echoes Through Eternity. I am your host, Dr. Jeffrey D. Skinner. I am joined in the studio today by Reverend Dr. Bob Hunter. He is out of Arizona, and his ministry, his specialty is kind of revitalizing the church. He helps churches to kind of revitalize themselves through ministry to men, not necessarily a men's ministry, although that's part of it, but more how we, in this day and age, how we can find a healthy, idealized version of masculinity and manhood. And he works a lot with that. He and I were talking on Facebook the other day. It's where I meet a lot of our guests. And of course, he is a Nazarene pastor as well. And we were talking and he said, "Hey, I'd love to talk about these men's issues here and how to revitalize that church." And so let's have you on. We haven't had anybody like that. So welcome, Bob. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see your face and hear your voice, Jeff. Appreciate the work that you're doing to revitalize the church and to bring awareness to some of the issues that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about you and who Bob is, and let's let people kind of pull the veil back on and mystery back of who you are and kind of give us some personal connection there.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So I have been married to my lovely bride, Cambria, for almost 30 years. So we are empty nesters. Our children are grown. We have one child at Olivet Nazarene University and one that has just recently graduated from Olivet.
Close your eyes, Rebecca. We're not at that.
No, I hear you. Trevecca, by the way, is a wonderful place. So yeah. we're so blessed to have great institutions.
We are.
And nonetheless, my older son is an underground miner. So he works deep beneath the surface of the earth, mining precious metals. So I'm in a stage of life where I'm able to give my time to issues like this and mentoring young men and helping churches think about how to do men's ministry in the 21st century. So my background, though, is extensively in pastoring. I've been a pastor. I've been an associate pastor more recently, and I've also been a professor, an adjunct professor. I served for 13 years at Grand Canyon University, just recently have transitioned away from that commitment. And I've also served Nazarene Bible College for 12 years. In the online capacity. So my passion is spiritual formation and leadership and masculine spiritual development. And so that has been my primary gig, so to speak. But I have also worked in the public schools. I am what you call a glorified substitute teacher. Though,
if only we could have lots of substitute teachers with doctorates, right?
Yeah. Oh, and it's never just that. Believe me, I'm the one that they call when a teacher quits or gets fired or has grand jury duty or goes out on maternity leave, and they call and say, "Hey, will you come in for 6 weeks and teach social studies?"
Yeah, long term. That's good.
Yeah, I love doing it, and I'm glad for the opportunities to have done it. It helps me connect with youth culture. And I'm passionate about education, and it has really worked out, and they keep having me back. So
that's great.
Anyway, so, God has given me a diverse portfolio of experiences professionally. And I've also worked as a contractor. And, so I just feel like my life has been enriched through all of the unique opportunities that I've had to be a representative of the kingdom and various domains.
Good. Well, let's kind of get on topic here and let's talk about you. We were talking before you got on. You said a lot of churches will contact you and ask you kind of how does that conversation go when they contact you? How do we do a men's ministry? How do we revitalize our church with the men? What are they asking when they talk to you?
Yeah. So a lot of churches really just don't know what to do. We're at a very interesting crossroads because men are leaving the church. They're disappearing, vanishing from the pews. And, so there's a lot of talk about, what's happening with men. They're just not here. And we know that men are in crisis and we desperately need a ministry to men and not necessarily a program, not an event or a men's ministry, formally speaking, but a ministry to men. How do we do that? And that really is the conversation that I feel like is most beneficial to local churches. How do we have a ministry to men and not necessarily start up this big men's program where Saturday morning we're all going to gather and we're going to have breakfast and we're going to bring in a speaker and then we're all going to do this men's retreat or go to this men's event. And, it ends up being this really hyped program, so that's not really what we're after. So I try to steer the conversation to being an advocate for men. And how can we intentionally and deliberately recognize the importance of having a gender-specific ministry aimed at a vulnerable group of people? Because men are vulnerable today. Men are at risk. There's tremendous need. We could talk at length about the collapse of men in society, but we're basically dealing with an at-risk group of people that are vanishing from the pews. And in some cases, pastors, they don't even recognize what's happening. Yeah. They're really not aware of just how urgent this matter is. And I'll start off and just say, hey, have you looked around? Are you keeping your finger on the pulse here? Or have you looked at how many women you have coming to church versus how many men? And what groups in particular are missing? And it's stunning, Jeff, just the crisis that we're in today. So the conversation kind of, sometimes, runs along those lines. But this is what's happening with men today. They're leaving the church and they're in crisis. And we desperately need a ministry to men. So that's where I like to see the conversation go. I like the conversation to be framed that way because I think it takes a lot of pressure off. Maybe we feel like, hey, now we don't feel under the gun to create something formal and have a designated leader. That could be very disappointing. And, that can create maybe some anxieties and some expectations that just don't need to be there. So let's talk about a ministry to men that's intentional and deliberate, that recognizes that, men are in crisis, and a gender-specific ministry aimed at this vulnerable group of people could be very helpful. It could help us revitalize the local church. Now, the rationale that I use is Acts 6, where, as you may recall, there's a conflict in the church between the Hellenistic Jews and the native Jews, which resulted in widows getting left behind. And, immediately the apostles recognize, oh, wait a minute, we got a problem here. We have a vulnerable group of people that are being left behind. Their needs aren't being addressed. We need to do something about that. So let's delegate some people and make sure that attention is given to this group of people. And so in many ways, that can, be a rationale for us because men are, tremendously at risk. And most of the suicides are men. If you look at the incarceration rate, it's disturbing. You look at the addictions, and the need to help mental health issues in particular. I mean, it's stunning. And I don't feel that the church has really responded. Where are we? And there's a certain stigma because everybody's screaming, toxic masculinity, and it's a Me Too world. And I will tell you, I don't think any conversation I've had has been the same. They're all different. and every church, has a little bit of a different approach. But, kind of my angle on it is, look, we need to fix our approach. Sometimes our approach is just broken. It's just broken. And we need to rethink it and try to imagine what men's ministry could be, or a ministry to men is what I like to call it.
Christian leaders everywhere are talking about Revitalize to Plant. Written by Drs. Desmond Barrett and Jeffrey D. Skinner, Revitalize to Plant is more than a philosophical approach to church planting and revitalization. The authors have experienced the crucible of leading in the trenches of ministry. It's gritty, practical, and most of all, recasts our vision and understanding of church planting and revitalization. Revitalize to Plant, now available on Amazon or revitalizetoplant.com. That's revitalizetoplant.com. The last resource you'll need to bring new life to your church.
So that's what brought me into it. And 9 years ago, we launched a ministry to young men in particular. The ministry is called Rip for Life. It's a not-for-profit 501c3. And so we began to hold week-long summer camp adventures for young men. And I started with one event, and then it morphed into 3. So that's what I do in the summer is we recruit young men, and we recruit college age, staff to be among us to serve as counselors. We call them mentors. And so we take those young men out. We actually go out for 7 days, and we're mentoring them. We're teaching life skills. We're modeling, we're creating community. And our mission is to create a Christ-like culture. So we're a little bit of an anomaly because we don't fit with some of the more conservative men's ministries or adventure ministries where, there's just a lot of that complementarianism, and a lot of that machoism, so to speak. So we're a little bit of a different bird, so we don't have quite the appeal to some of the more conservative groups, but by the same token, we haven't been very well received among Nazarenes either, because nobody wants to do that adventure stuff. That's kind of nitty gritty. It's dirty. You're out there doing work service projects, and you're doing, all these feats of strength where you're slamming tires and flipping tires, and, you're chopping wood and all this stuff. And we don't want anything to do with that. So we've had, from Nazarenes, we've really been kind of, I don't want to say shunned, but they keep us at arm's length. So we've had to, we feel like we've really kind of been, out on our own. So we've outreached the community, and we draw kids in directly from the community. A lot of them that are fatherless. So that's been kind of our thrust is, we really want to tap into some of these fatherless young men that desperately need a mentor and a role model in their lives. So that's kind of what we've done. And so I've tried to use my experience having done this type of ministry for 9 years, to share what I've learned with local churches and to talk about some ways in which maybe we can partner, or, if there are ways that I can help them, launch a ministry to men and do that in a thoughtful way without the expectations that we're going to have a big event. There's going to be 200 men and we're going to bring in the speaker and, really, that's let's try to get away from that. Men's ministry is relational. And that's our motto in our ministry, Rip for Life Ministries. If I say to my guys, if we're sitting around a campfire, if I say to them, what comes first? They all say it together in unison, relationships. We put relationships first. And wow, it's so liberating. It's so freeing, to be in that place and to know that, relational leadership is really what it's all about.
Yeah, that's good.
So I threw a lot at you there,
yeah,
so we can sort of pick this apart here. But it's fundamentally the approach to men's ministry. I'm greatly concerned about our approach, and I feel in many cases our approach is broken. It's just broken.
Yeah, you mentioned that you'd kind of been shunned. I think more than anything, there is, especially within our own denomination, and, talking about our own denomination is kind of like, we can talk about our family, but we don't want other people to talk about our family. But anything out of the box, I think sometimes there's a big resistance to. And what you're talking about is out of the box. We are very much geared towards that wild at heart mentality there. And so when we find something different, it's like, well, I'm not too sure about that. So I think consistency in what you're doing is good. And you just continually do it over and over again. And eventually people come around to understanding what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. When people observe us, it's really, it's gratifying, and again, I'm patting us on the back. I'm bragging about us a little bit because I'm proud of what God has done through our ministry. But our ministry has been observed even by a general superintendent who I'll not name, but nonetheless, I've had church leaders come to me when they observe us and say, wow, that is really cool. What you're doing with young men is fascinating to me. They're engaged. They're introduced to the spiritual disciplines. They're performing acts of service, and they're having a good time. And it's refreshing. It's rejuvenating. And so we've had good success, but, initially, when I try to introduce our ministry, there's perspective because immediately, especially, folks that are, on the more enlightened side of ministry, let me just put it that way. We won't use the word woke, but a lot of them will look at us, we're a little bit suspect because, you're going to take these guys out and you're going to teach male stereotypes. You're going to teach, this is complementarianism repackaged into adventure ministry. I know what you're doing. So we're kind of, their eyebrows are a little bit raised, but if they only knew, and it's stunning to me. And in some cases we've been able to win some of those over, but it's hard work. It's really hard work.
Yeah.
But again, I think, Jeff, some of this comes back to the fact that, there are people who feel that gender specific ministries, that it's been overdone, and it perhaps has been, and it can polarize the church. Well, you got men's ministry over here, you got women's ministry over here, and never the twain shall meet, and you don't want, that kind of polarization in the church. I understand that. I do. I appreciate that. I absolutely acknowledge that could be a problem. But I think we've out of concern for polarizing church, we've gone the other direction. And we really don't have anything specific to offer men or women or any vulnerable group in the church, right, whether it be, fatherless, kids that attend, that need to be adopted, that are in foster care or whatever. I feel like sometimes, the approach is, we're all just one big family. We all just come together. We're all the body of Christ. Okay, I love that. I value that. Absolutely, 100%. But I want to be effective and I want to impact people. And there's a certain dynamic. There's a camaraderie. There's a beauty in coalescing a group of men together to do something and to be together and experience fellowship. And I think in some cases, we're losing some of that. I do. I think we're losing some of that. And we don't want to offend anybody, and not everybody fits into those gender stereotypes. So let's just not do it. I think we hurt ourselves. I really do. I think we hurt ourselves by not recognizing the need for a gender specific approach to some ministries. Some. Now, this is on the periphery. This isn't this isn't the whole enchilada. I mean, these are things that we're doing on the periphery. I feel like for me, it's important, and this is how we can be effective. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite theologians is Tim Green, and he's a professor of Old Testament
I know
at Trevecca Nazarene University.
Yeah, incredible.
I was trying to remember his quote. He said, "But our conversation reminds me of something." He says, "When we try to hold on to the past, we create idols, but when we seek relevancy, we simply worship Baal." I believe is the way it goes. And so Baal was whatever works, right? So if we feel like a gender specific, where we have that, as you were talking about, these pods of men, women, children, and teens, and none of them really cross and meet. That's kind of the old way of doing things. We want to hold on to that, but then simultaneously, if we just want to go, to use the word woke, I will go there, where because it's gender specific, and there may be some who fall on that gender number 7 spectrum there, then we shouldn't do it. I think that's relativism. I think that's where we're simply trying to be so appealing to culture that we lose our identity. And that's always the challenge of church. I mean, it's the challenge when we're in exile. It's the challenge when we are even in the promised land. It's our challenge to maintain that identity of faithfulness, right, to what God is. And without, familiarity brings comfort, I guess, and we take it for granted. And I think in some ways, in the Bible Belt, but in America in general, we have been so steeped in Christian identity with nationalism and everything else kind of seeping in there that we just kind of discount the Bible. So rather than going to that Bible for that model of, okay, what is faithfulness? What is biblical masculinity? What is a Christ-like identity? We look to corporate books. We look to, anything but the Bible sometimes. And I think that's where we go wrong. I love your emphasis on relationship, though, because men in general, we have a reputation of being horrible at relationships.
Right. And you're absolutely right. And so that's a huge part of what we do is helping men build relationships. In fact, our ministry is going to shift. I'll be 54 this summer, and I've been doing this a long time. So I'm gonna shift from being in the field and doing a lot of the hands-on stuff. And we're hopeful to hopefully next fall launch a life coaching mentoring type of service where we would meet with young men in particular, especially young adult men, in a setting where we can mentor them through life. Now, I've done it before at previous churches. So we're looking to launch that a little more formally, but it's helping them succeed in relationships. And we're going to call it resilience training, because for a lot of young men, they experience failure and there's a lot of it to be had, and they just don't know where to go. They don't know what to do with that. So we need to, to help them, develop a healthy life perspective and build relationships in a positive way. I want to pick up on something, Jeff, if I can. Some of the resistance that we've had to doing a ministry to men has not only been along the lines of, well, we shouldn't even be doing gender specific ministries. Some of it comes down to a misunderstanding, I believe, of, gender. And in some cases, we have people that fail to recognize that men and women are intrinsically different.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that going around. And I think that's a dangerous path to go down. I really do. And I don't think it's supported by brain science at all. The more we understand about our biology, how we're created, and neuroscience in particular, the more we're convinced just how different men and women really, really are. Now, I know some people have taken this to the extreme. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, blah, blah, blah. And, you've got them, so you've got them so completely polarized that you have a real problem. But I think there's a little bit of this, gender's really fluid and men and women really aren't that different. But here's the problem with that. There's a little too much emphasis placed on nurture and not enough on nature. And brain science is telling us that we really, really are very different creatures. Yeah. And so naturally ministry is going to take shape around that. That's understandable.
Yeah.
And, so this week, I don't mind saying it, I kind of got into it with largely a group of female pastors around not just that issue, but others. And again, in some cases, it's women that have been legitimately been hurt by toxic men that have abused, that haven't been faithful. And I want to, I want to say right up front, I get that. I understand that. And that's what we want to stop. That's our goal. Our mission is we want these men to have a transformative experience with Jesus Christ. Yeah. Absolutely 100%. We do not want that. But in the course of this conversation, and it had to do with men's ministry, the question, really was about how do we approach? What is the approach? What is the approach? And I, was very bold and passionate in saying, look, I think your approach is broken. The temptation is to lash out with pain and create more victims.
Yeah.
And nothing shuts down a man quicker than criticizing him for not measuring up, blaming him, alienating him unintentionally, maybe with your complaints, and, screaming to the world, toxic masculinity. I mean, it's what I call, and this will get me in trouble, so the emails are coming, it's what I call the Karen factor. And men recoil at that. We're going to alienate them with that approach. This is just the mentality that we're up against. I'm not endorsing the use of that phrase at all, but this is what we're up against. And we have to work toward achieving a positive agenda if we're going to have a ministry to men. We have to help men find a positive vision for their life and make sure that they have access to the resources and the mentoring that can help them have a transformative experience with Jesus Christ. We're not going to get there if all we do is sit around and just, men are so toxic. They're so passive. They're so terrible. Look what they've done. They've left their children. They've had affairs. They're addicted to porn. Okay, what do we do with that now? Lamenting toxic masculinity. Okay, let's do that for a minute. But we have to move on. If we nurse that hurt forever, we're really going to impede our ability to influence men, because men recoil at that. They just do. If we're going to criticize, if we're going to point fingers and fix blame, then they're not going to be around, and they're already disappearing. So my plea was, hey, let's fix our approach here, because that's not going to work. We have to work on our foundational approach. We have to create the right atmosphere and invite participation. Let's not get hung up on past wounds. Let's create a positive agenda for men. Canceling men is not going to work. It's not going to work. I mean, these guys are hurting like everybody else. And it's a vulnerable demographic. And we have to recognize that. And okay, now, where do we go from here? Let's talk about some positive ways in which we can do that. Let's actually have a strategy. The hurt that we've experienced, our pain from the past, that's not a viable strategy to reach men.
Right.
It's not. So men respond best to other men that have been healed, that can help them create a positive vision for their life. That's what they respond to. They do not respond to a group of people sitting down and pointing fingers and blaming and toxic masculinity, this, and, that doesn't work, Jeff. It doesn't work.
Do you want to grow and multiply your church? Perhaps you need help launching a new church, or even a Christian ministry like a coffee shop or something else. Do you find yourself struggling just to recruit volunteers week after week? Is your church in need of new life? Maybe you're fresh out of seminary and the organizational leadership called you with an opportunity, and you realize that opportunity needs a fresh start. Or perhaps you're a church planter. You've been going it alone for a while now, and you're exhausted, lonely, and doubting your call. We understand. Church planting, launching a new church is hard. Missional Leadership Coaching is here to help. Go to missionalleadershipcoaching.com and click on our free offer to get started today. That's missionalleadershipcoaching.com. We look forward to helping you.
Ironically, I think it creates toxic masculinity.
I think it absolutely does.
Because what it does is it polarizes you. So, okay, well, if my option is to basically be effeminate, I'm not going to do that. So then my only other option is I go to this unhealthy masculinity that they call it toxic, that's labeled toxic masculinity. And so now I become the living embodiment of everything that you hate as a man. Well, you created that. I mean, we've lost the ability to speak in terms and understand nuance is what's happened. And it's ironic that we call this postmodernity, where we're supposed to avoid labels.
Right. That we resort to labels because we think that's going to fix our problem.
That's it. Yeah.
And men, what I've tried to get, people that have experienced legitimate hurt. Again, we're talking about, men definitely have the capacity to inflict pain. I get that. Absolutely. But we have to make sure that we can get that hurt healed. And then at the same time, we have to do two things at once. We have to have a positive approach. The positive approach persuades. we need to invite men to the table despite our frustrations, despite the past wounds and our preconceived ideas about what they should and shouldn't be doing. We still have to get beyond that. And ultimately, we want to influence them. We want to help him who is struggling. And we cannot do that if he's somewhere else. If we lose proximity to men, we reduce the chance that we can impact their lives. And they're already disappearing from the pews. We want them to be around us, among us, and we want to invite them into this transformative experience with Jesus Christ. So I can't do that if I don't have proximity. So let's not sit around, toss labels, and nurse and rehearse our hurts and wounds from the past. It's just not going to win. It's not going to help. Because if we're successful, and if a man gets it, everyone wins. His family wins, his church wins, his children win, his wife wins. If a man gets it, everybody wins. Everybody in the room wins. So in order to keep that proximity, we have to maintain a positive approach. Yeah. And so that was the nature of the conversation I had this week, which was really, really, passionate, intense at times. But my contention with the individuals with whom I spoke this week is that, hey, look, rethink your approach. I just want to leave it at that. Rethink your approach. There's a way forward here if we dare to think through our approach.
Yeah. I love the idea of proximity because it applies not just for men. I mean, it is why the church in general is dying today, is because we've lost our proximity to culture at all.
Right.
We've lost the longer you're a Christian, the birds of a feather flock together. We've all heard it. So ideological people tend to, shape and hang out with each other, right? Because it's just more comfortable.
Right.
And so when you're Christian, after you've been Christian 5 or 6 years, you tend to hang around other Christians. You lose your proximity to those outside of that, which is why I love the idea that you're mentoring young men. We've lost, and I don't know. I mean, again, I love the American culture. I love individual. I love the identity. I love uniqueness, but simultaneously, we are still shaped by our environment. We're still shaped by our experiences. We can still be an individual. We're not creating a bubble where we have no influence on anything outside of that. And so mentoring, I believe, is that key. I think it's where it's going to be the key for success in your ministry. It's going to be key success for the church in general going forward as we begin to mentor others, multiply others, and it's not a new idea.
No.
In the Jewish culture, they had the rabbi, right? I mean, that was the whole point of that. If you didn't have a rabbi, you took a trade and you had a I forgot their name, but the head person that would help the journeyman, the person who's just starting out, So I love that idea. I love your approach and certainly want to we'll make sure we include all that in the show notes for people to reach you. I'm assuming you got a website where people can reach you.
We don't have a website, but I do have some resources that when you're ready to rattle those off.
All right.
One of which is, you speak of mentoring. I wrote a mentoring course because that's been a major theme in my life. I wrote a mentoring course that's available through the Institute of Ministry Enrichment through Nazarene Bible College.
Okay.
And we've had that up for years. And every student that has taken that course has come out of it and said, you know what? This has enriched my ministry. So I wish I would have known this years ago.
Yeah.
And again, that's just not bragging on me. It's just the material is great. And it's not all original with me. But mentoring can be taught. And certainly I'm willing to assist anyone that would like to take the next step in mentoring ministry. There's some ways in which we can go about doing that, especially as it relates to men.
Yeah.
And we definitely, and my heart, Jeff, really goes out to women who are serving as senior pastors in local churches. And I just this week fielded another question in a forum from a female pastor that has a group of men that she's trying to mobilize these men. She's trying to get them involved. And I really have a heart for that because I served 3 years under a female senior pastor.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been there. I get it, and I understand some of the unique challenges. Our senior pastor was great. She really wanted something to happen. And of course, I no sooner got hired and COVID hit and it kind of blew some things up that we wanted to do. But nonetheless, I have that experience. and that has also given me a credential to have these conversations. No, I've actually served under a female pastor. I get that. I love working for women. Most of my professional life, I've worked in environments that were predominantly, populated by women professionals,
right.
whether
right.
that be in education or in theological education. Most of my students are women.
Is that right?
Because it's lopsided. So we're having 65% of the student population, especially at GCU, they're women preparing for ministry. And, so that's been my mission field. My goal is to help equip them. And in many cases, they're coming from traditions where they really don't believe that they can serve in any capacity over a man. So thus my job has been to try to help them. Hey, you know what? There could be more. Think about this.
Yeah. Good.
So there's so much here that I wish we could, jump into. Certainly the debate about complementarianism and egalitarianism is alive and well. And, that's still a battle for us. It's one that I'm pretty passionate about. I have a very egalitarian marriage. My wife is a working professional, as my daughter is. And, I'm a firm believer in how we operate in the Church of the Nazarene, that women can be ordained to serve in those, in that capacity. But when you're doing men's ministry, again, that is, that sometimes, people don't read that right away.
Right.
They immediately assume, oh, there's that complementarian group. Watch out for them. They're teaching it. You know, so, there's, a little bit of a raised eyebrow. We're suspect to that. And I would just encourage anybody that's listening to this podcast, be careful. Don't assume because there are many of us out there that are working diligently, to advocate for men. We're not complementarians. We are egalitarian, and that is our belief, our conviction. But there's a lot of work to be done, and we really want men to experience the transformative life that is ours in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's good. Let me ask you, do one more thing for me here.
Okay.
Just in case, I think everybody probably knows what it is, but just in case they don't, compare, contrast egalitarianism and complementarianism right quick.
Yeah. So complementarianism is basically, a perspective that, some would draw from the Bible, in order to support it. But, the thinking is, the rationale is that it's male headship. It's fundamentally male headship, and that women submit themselves to men. Women cannot teach or in any way exercise headship over men. And so, so that really is the perspective. And now, again, in a lot of those traditions, they draw from the Bible heavily. I feel like it's a misread, and they bring a lot of their cultural assumptions to, the way that they interpret scripture. But the egalitarianism is basically biblical equality. It's to say that, hey, we're really equals. We're on the same team here. We're two different people, but we're fundamentally equal. And, that's in a nutshell. That's how I approach it. And, certainly, again, that's been a major theme in my life. My wife, has been a partner in ministry with me and a working professional, and we are a team. I do not exercise male headship over my wife. And that's something that I think is is kind of the major difference. And, so in conservative evangelical churches, complementarianism reigns supreme. That's pretty much how it is. Men are serving as on the elder boards, they're pastors, women are the children's ministers or office administrators or what have you. And obviously that underutilizes women. They have the capacity to do so much more. And we want them to do that. We want to raise young men that recognize the need to, empower women, to launch them into life so that they can become all that God has called them to be. And that's certainly what I do. In every one of my camps, I teach egalitarian values. I don't use that terminology, but I have a couple of creative ways, of presenting that lesson to them. They don't know I'm doing it or when it's coming. But some of them that have been with me several years are like, oh no, here it comes. He's going to get on that kick again. He's going to, he's going to talk about, how men should treat women. And, so there's a certain beauty in that. I hope that we can inspire, a ministry to men that recognizes that value. And I hope to be a voice out there to, promote that kind of positive change.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, Bob, like I said, I will, after the podcast, I'll get you to send all the information for all of your resources. We'll put all that in the show notes so people can access that, because this is audio and most folks will be driving down the road. We don't want them wrecking trying to access resources. But it's been great having a great conversation, interesting conversation. Thank you for your serving the kingdom and your service to the kingdom. I love Out of the Box Ministries. As a church planter, I understand what it is for people to look at you like you've got 3 heads and 4 eyes and things like that. So it's good. But take heart in knowing that there's lots of folks out there doing lots of things out of the box, and they all feel like they're getting pushed back. Because I tell them, look, when you are the pioneer and forging the path, you're the one with the machete in the front. You're the one that has to cut down the jungle and kill the bears and tigers and lions and everything else that comes out of the woodwork there. So good to have you, brother.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
You have a blessed day. All right.
Yep. All right. Thank you again. Take care.
You can be a co-creator with God by helping to echo our guest voices. Share our episodes with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Give us positive 5-star reviews. The more positive reviews we have, the more visibility we have, and the more voices that are echoed through eternity. We often invite guests who are serving faithfully year after year, often in anonymity in their respective roles in ministries. God sees them, and the reality is for a good kingdom leader, that's enough. We do not do what we do for the accolades of humanity. We do it because we're called by God. But I believe that God uses people like you and I to continue those reverberations and echo them throughout eternity. You can partner with God by liking, subscribing, writing a quick positive 5-star review, and again, sharing those voices with friends and family and on your own social media accounts. Those reviews will eventually lead to other guests who have larger platforms that have more listeners who will then in turn listen to the show. And again, it further echoes those voices, which is the whole vision of the Echoes Through Eternity podcast here, is to continue echoing those voices that God is echoing through eternity there. So like and subscribe and review us if you would. We'd appreciate that greatly.